Optimal health for high performers. This is the Health Upgrade Podcast with Dr. Nawaz Habib.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Health Upgrade Podcast. This is Dr. Habib, and I'm here with JP. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am great. This episode of the Health Upgrade Podcast is brought to you by Truvaga. Have you been looking for a simple way to feel calmer, think clearer, and sleep better? Imagine achieving this with just 2 minutes a day. I'm excited to introduce you to Truvaga, a handheld device that supports your nervous system through gentle vagus nerve stimulation. As a doctor specializing in functional health and wellness, I've seen firsthand how Truvaga has accelerated healing in my clients. I've used this device to help people with a range of issues, from sleep disturbances and heart palpitations to digestive dysfunction, nervous system imbalances, and mental wellness concerns. The results have honestly been remarkable. Truvaga is designed to catalyze and accelerate the shift in your body from fight or flight to rest, digest, and recover mode, helping you manage stress, maintain mental clarity, and unwind more easily. It's not just theory. I've witnessed its positive impact on real people facing real health challenges. The best part? Truvaga fits seamlessly into your routine. No need to carve out hours for wellness. Just 2 minutes a day can make a difference. It's a small investment of time for potentially significant benefits in how you feel and function each day. If you're curious to experience Truvaga for yourself, visit truvaga.com/upgrade. You can save $30 on your device by using the code UPGRADE30 at checkout. Remember, that's truvaga.com, truvaga.com/upgrade. It might just be the first step towards a calmer, clearer you, just as it has been for many of my clients. So today we're going to do a bit of a shorter episode, one to just kind of underline a theory that has been proposed in the psychology field that involves the vagus nerve. And that is one that is very well known on the psychological side, proposed by Dr. Stephen Porges, the polyvagal theory. I just want to explain what the polyvagal theory is, how it kind of sees the psychological impact on vagus nerve function, and discuss the effect of how it then results in potential physiological changes, specifically when we're talking about vagus and sympathetic activation kind of being the two sides of the coin here. Okay, so we'll get into that a little bit. In going into this, I just want to share, and I've got a few slides. So if you're listening on audio, we'll do our best to explain the entire journey here with regards to what we're looking at. But if you're on video on YouTube or wherever you're watching this video, you'll be able to see the slides as we go along. So I'm just going to share my screen and we can jump right into that. So first I want to talk about how we identify root causes and the 4 types of stress that trigger the root causes of chronic disease. In my book, Upgrade Your Vagus Nerve, I outline the 4 types of stress that I find most people experience and need to be classified into, and those are the ones that usually result in vagus nerve dysfunction. The first is daily stressors, which I like to also talk to about as habits. So what are your habits around sleep? What are your habits around diet? What are your habits around taking care of your kids or self-care habits? So if you have habits that are beneficial or good, that's wonderful, but we all have a few habits that are less than beneficial and often result in health struggle for us and will often result in vagus nerve dysfunction. Those are the daily stressors or habits that we all need to become aware of. The second area is psychological stressors, and these are what we call emotions, and how emotions are dictated by or create the filters through which we see the world, which then result in a shift to whether we go sympathetic or parasympathetic based on what we subjectively perceive as happening around us in our environment. And so these are the psychological stressors. These are the things that scuff the lens through which we see the world. And that's what we're going to dig into today. The other 2 areas of stress that need to be assessed are physical stressors. These are movement-based. So are you moving well? Are you exercising? What's your muscle capacity, muscle quality, flexibility like? Have you been injured? Has there been some sort of physical injury, a TBI, a concussion, a whiplash type injury? something along those lines. Or are you living an entirely sedentary life where you're not moving nearly enough? So these are stressors when we're not doing it enough, or if we're even doing it too much. And on the last one is biochemical stressors. And these are environmental stressors. This can be internal environment, such as microbiome dysbiosis, foods that come in, toxins that enter our body, and even things on the outside of our environment, things like indoor air quality that we're all exposed to on a daily basis that may not be filtered effectively. Or recently in LA, we had the forest fires, right? That affected the outdoor air quality. Are you cooking with chemicals? Are you using oils that might not be super clean, or cooking cookware that might have chemicals on it and that will be ingested? Or is there a lot of plastic in your environment? So these are all biochemical stressors that affect physiology and will be a root cause resulting in stress. But like I said, I really want to take today to focus on psychological stressors, because that's really where the polyvagal theory really fits in.
And I think it goes back to when we talk about homeostasis. We all have a physical state that, if left to our own devices, our bodies like to move into. But so do our minds and our emotions and our cognitive state. We tend to move into a narrow band of emotions and thoughts that sort of define our center. And things that push us away from that homeostatic sort of comfort zone are stresses. And we talk about them being physiological stresses or psychological stresses, but emotional stresses are the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about, I think, in this discussion.
Absolutely. So thank you for kind of breaking that down. But yes, we want to take today to really focus on those psychological stressors that affect our emotions. Psychological stressors that affect our emotions, sympathetic and parasympathetic within our body, that can result in chronic disease if we stay in the sympathetic state for too long.
Yeah, and understand that being in an emotionally stressed state will lead to a physiological problem. So that it's not like they're in isolation from one another. Just because the stresses may not be coming at you from a physiological direction doesn't mean that you won't have a physiological response. We act as sort of the translator between something that's not physical into something that's physical through how our emotions and ultimately how our metabolism and our immune system and all the rest of our systems react as a result.
And I think it's really important to note that our bodies respond to all types of stress in the same way, right? Physiological stress, emotional stress, psychological stress, habit stress. The result is always the same. Stress is stress to the body. Now, how we see that stress is really important to note. If we see it as what we know as hormetic stressor, something that we're pushing just slightly outside of our homeostatic balance, where we're exercising and we're pushing a little more weight than we are normally used to, or pushing a little bit more uphill on our run than we're used to, right? Doing something a little bit more, just straining ourselves just slightly more with the intention of increasing the bandwidth of our homeostatic load or capacity to handle that homeostatic mechanism, and teaching ourselves how to handle stressors when we go just slightly outside of the realm of what feel comfortable handling. I think that's important to note, where when we go far beyond that threshold, that's where a lot of the challenges really start to pop up for a lot of people, particularly if we stay in a state of stress or sympathetic overload for too long. So that's really important to note here.
Yeah, mathematically, just to make the parallel for those people who like math out there, you could think of it almost like a chaotic system. There's an attractor. That attractor is your homeostatic state. That's the state where you want to be, and everything sort of draws into that. If you're within a range of less than ideal circumstances, you're still going to end up back at that attraction point. But if you're pushed too far outside of that, that's where, chaos ensues. That's where you've left the homeostatic zone entirely, and now you're dealing with chronic problems, chronic disease, other things where you've been knocked out of that homeostatic state. And now you have to find some other metastable state that isn't necessarily comfortable or a good place to be. And getting back takes energy, it takes effort.
Yeah. And that's why hormetic stress is actually important, because what it's doing is it's trying to teach resilience to get back to that center point of homeostasis from outside. And if you lack resilience, what that means is you're unable to actively get back to that parasympathetic state, to that homeostatic state very effectively. So this is the point of autonomic balance, autonomic flexibility, and resilience is literally the ability to bounce back even when the stress load is very high. And so that's what we try to teach with everything that I've Health Upgraded and everything that we're trying to post online with all of our content.
I think that's a great definition of what resilience is. From that, again, that mathematical perspective, we said there's the attractor point, which is your homeostatic base. But as you move away from it, how far can you move away from it before you come back, before you lose control? You lose the plot, if you will. How far do you have to get away? And if you have a lot of resilience, you have sort of a broad spectrum, a broad region where you can move into and then still come back and not have been disturbed permanently outside of your comfort zone.
Exactly. How large can you stretch that threshold before you reach pure sympathetic overload? That's awesome. Okay, so let's dig into the psychological stress and the theory of the polyvagal theory. So Dr. Stephen Porges proposed this, I believe it was around 30 years ago, and he's written a few books on the topic with the support of other psychology providers such as Deb Dana and wonderful, brilliant people that have come up with this thought process of understanding how the psychological side of things affects our physiology. So I'm going to go to a new slide here that is going to just show what we know as the polyvagal chart. Okay, so the polyvagal chart here has three different areas. On the bottom, we have a green zone, and this is where we want to try to spend the majority of our time. This is the theory, and we're going to talk about the difference between how we see it on a psychology side versus how it physiologically actually occurs in practice, because there is a difference here, because there aren't exactly direct parallels between a dorsal vagal state, which we'll get into, and actual vagus nerve activation during those times. So we'll get into what that means. But on the bottom of this 3-layer chart is a green zone, which is the state of ventral vagal activation. And the key to turn this system on is the feeling of safety. So I believe, and I think what's always constantly going on in our subconscious is we're constantly scanning our environment subconsciously through a process called neuroception, trying to determine if we are safe. So we're constantly asking this question, am I safe in the current situation that I'm in? We can be asking about it in very different ways, right? Am I safe in a psychological standpoint? Am I safe in a physical standpoint? What about from a biochemical standpoint? Am I in a safe or a zone of safety at this time? And when it comes to the psychological standpoint, we're looking at a zone of social engagement, calmness, connection, being settled, being grounded, being mindful, being curious, being open, willingness to share and connect with other people. And that is really a key piece to this social engagement space, or the ventral vagal space, is connection and safety. When we feel safe, we're able to connect in a much more grounded way and be in a parasympathetic, ventral vagal, or vagally activated state, rest, digest, recover state when we feel safe.
I think a parallel here is when we talk about inside a cell, intracellularly, we talk about, is it the appropriate response to the environment and to the situation that the cell is in to begin growing? And we have mechanisms in the cell for nutrient sensing. And so what you're doing is you're looking, or the cell is gauging whether or not it has the hydration, whether it has the energy available, whether it has the amino acid building blocks available, whether it has the right lipids within itself to grow, to build new proteins, to build new organelles, to maybe even reproduce and create a whole new cell. That state of surplus, of thriving. That's when you're in that rest, digest, restore, and grow state. And I think that is psychologically, he describes this as a ventral vagal state of safety. I think that corresponds well to what is physiologically a vagally dominant or a parasympathetically dominant autonomic tone. So it is consistent.
Yeah. And from a nutrient standpoint, I would almost say abundance, that we have everything we need for the cell to perform every action that it deems necessary to maintain optimal health patterns. Right. So abundance is kind of this idea, I think, that can be aligned to that safety ventral vagal. I have everything I need, and I have nothing that's going to cause me to not be able to perform a task, and I have no threats to my survival around me, right? So great analogy, great parallel there. I love that. Just above that green area on the bottom, we've got the second layer, which is a yellow layer, and that is known as the sympathetic danger state or hyperarousal state. Now, I don't love the idea of calling this purely danger state or purely fight or flight state, because I think it's necessary to actually enter this state from time to time. Okay. So I think we need to be able to go into sympathetic state to make sure that we don't constantly need to be in ventral vagal. I think the sympathetic nervous system, it's been given a bad reputation as being something we don't want to experience. I think it's something we do want to experience, but we want to be able to bounce back from it to the ventral vagal state.
I view this yellow band as sort of, these are your hormetic stresses. These are the ones that are actually going to make you stronger as a result. They're testing the limits of what your resilience is. They're testing you within that range of discomfort away from the great attractor, if you will, but you're still able to get back there. So, the band here has fight or flight listed there, but remember that lifting weights, for example, that is simulating fighting. And running on a treadmill or running outside is simulating flight. So we can do this in a controlled manner that's, yes, there's no question the sympathetic nervous system is being activated here. So again, this is correct in physiologically and emotional terms, talking about how it's sympathetic activation. And I don't have quite the same level of dislike of the word danger here, because kids like danger. They like to put themselves in danger. They like scary movies. They like roller coasters. They like things like that that push them into that sympathetic state temporarily. They know that they're going to get off the roller coaster. They know that the movie isn't real.
My kids think that it's real.
Well, yeah, yours are very young.
They're a bit younger.
my kids hopefully don't think that those things are real. But the hyper arousal, they're looking for that. They're looking to test themselves because it's healthy. You want to be resilient. You want to be able to handle that.
I like that a lot. And where I would go even further with this model is I would split the yellow into almost yellow and orange being slightly above the yellow. And yellow is where we want to go into. It's pushing the accelerator a little bit so we can get to places. It's allowing our body to experience that arousal state within a controlled manner, or with some level of, I feel capable of being able to bounce back. And I think that's a little bit more of the, I'm driven. I'm meeting with my boss and I'm asking for a raise, and I feel comfortable being able to do that. Or I'm going to have an important business meeting. I'm capable of handling this. I feel like I can do it. And I think it's important to note in the corner here, there's a couple of things here. On the yellow band, it says, in quotes, the belief that I can do something, that I can get through a challenge, that I'm capable of handling this fight or flight type of situation that my body's going to be put into. And I always love these words of frustration, irritation, anger, rage, panic, fear, anxiety, worry, and concern. I think, yes, there's a gradient of them. So worry, concern, frustration, sure. But I also think engagement in a manner of growth is what I like to look at as something to push us into not necessarily hyper arousal, but an aroused state where we're capable, where we feel engaged. So I like it from time to time, and I like being able to go between kind of the lower yellow, lower sympathetic state and the upper green safety state, that ventral vagal state. We also see physiologically blood pressure increases, heart rate increases, right? We have more blood flow to the muscles during this time. We have less of a concern of fighting infection during that exact moment or worrying about digestion during that moment, right? Because we're engaging in something that is mildly a threat to our survival. We no longer feel entirely safe. And so what do we need to do? We need to engage the systems that allow us to get away from said threat.
Yeah. I think by and large, the physiological parallels or the physiological observations in this state are accurate. I do think there's a question about the blood clotting, because that tends to be something that is activated more with parasympathetic activation. In fact, there's work that's been done demonstrating that vagus nerve stimulation can, and we had Chris Shura on our podcast talking about this very early on. That was one of the first podcasts that I was a part of. So again, generally agree with the parallels that he tries to make to what's happening in the nervous system and what's happening physiologically. Few discrepancies, but by and large, correct.
Now, where there's a lot of controversy is the top layer of this ladder, which is the red zone. And this is what is called the dorsal vagal state, also known as the freeze state. Now, I liken this from the explanation that's given here. It's the areas of helplessness, depression, numbness, dissociation, shame, shutdown, hopelessness, preparation for death, and being trapped. I think this is being approached from a psychology mindset or a psychology bias where they're seeing patients that have pretty significant mental health issues. And I agree with some of obviously what's going on here. The issue is it directly linked to vagus nerve being turned on, or is there something else going on from an autonomics standpoint? So the analogy that I like to use here is the deer in the headlights type of scenario where the deer stops. They're unable to move because they're in a state where the threat to their survival is so severe that they tend to freeze. And I think it's important to note that there's a state here that's missing that you had mentioned earlier called fawning, which is, if we look at actually how things progress in nature, fight, flight are the base areas here of sympathetic activation. Then there's a fawning state. Why don't you explain the fawning state a little bit?
Yeah, think of it as sort of, you're being chased by a mob boss, okay? And the first thing you want to do is fight, and then you realize, I can't fight this guy. And so you run away, and then you get cornered, and the first thing you do is you beg for your life. That's sort of what that fawning stage is, where you fall to your knees and you're begging, you're saying, please don't do this. Yeah, your heart rate's going to slow down to a certain extent, but it's not exactly the same as resting. Your blood pressure may come down because you're not preparing to fight anymore, but it's not the same as being in that rest, digest, and restore state. And it's not, in my estimation, it's not vagally mediated. That is the difference between a temporary period of sympathetic activation versus a chronic activation. I think about, again, going back to the kids on a roller coaster or in a scary movie. It's fun to be on a roller coaster for 5 minutes. Not so fun to be on it for 5 hours, okay? It's not fun at all. In fact, you're probably seasick. You're not feeling well, you're probably catatonic at that 5 hours. But there's going to be a point where you go through the stages. You're holding on, and then you're screaming, and then you get to the point where you're begging to get off. And then finally, you've probably just given up and you've passed out.
Yeah.
None of that is good.
And that's not vaguely mediated
That is not
at all.
vaguely mediated at all. In fact, you've entered into that chronic sympathetic activation state where now you're causing real damage. not enough damage that you can get back, but you're actually seeing physiological changes, things like depression and anxiety. I mean, those are triggered by neurotransmitters, and there's changes that are taking place physiologically that are being driven by cortisol and by norepinephrine and by the sympathetic, physiologically, the sympathetic side of the autonomic nervous system.
Yeah, I think that roller coaster analogy fits perfectly because short-term bursts of sympathetic overdrive are almost fun, right? They're exciting. There's something about them where there's a bit of, a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of fear, a little bit of panic, but you know that you're going to be able to get off of it, except when you're not. And if that roller coaster keeps going and keeps going and keeps going, your body is going to eventually go into that freeze state. And I think that makes a lot of sense, even though that system is not, from a physiological standpoint, mediated through the vagus nerve. That's what they've called the dorsal vagal state. So the labeling, I think, is incorrect with regards to naming that it's a vagus nerve specific state. But I agree with you. I think we're on the exact same page here with regards to the fact that you can go up there, but it's not a vagus nerve activated state for sure. It's just a complete depletion state.
I think for those of you who are seeing this slide, the bands of green and yellow and red for the fawning and freezing state, they're all sort of have a constant width to them. And I think, and across the span of them, there's this sort of sine wave of you start at the bottom, you go up through the yellow phase into the freeze red phase, and then you come back down, which is called deactivation. I think that's reasonably accurate, but I think the thing that's really important to see and remember is that if you extended this out longitudinally, so you went out, years of this, you would see a change in the thickness of these bands. If you're always remaining in that safe zone, and we know people that are like this, they never get out of their safe zone. And what does that do? That reduces the size of their comfort zone for being in the yellow. Their ability to
little things throw them into the sympathetic state, right?
The I can state becomes really small. They don't feel as if they can handle very much, so they have to stay in that safe zone. And then the flip side of it is you've got these people who are regularly going in and staying in that red zone for a very long period of time. Well, it will also shrink that yellow zone tremendously so that the moment they leave their safe zone, they rush right into that freeze state. They're burned out. They can't handle it. They're frazzled, if you will. They've gone through PTSD. That now they've been through trauma so bad and for so long that they have no band where they can handle a little bit of stress. Those are the people who go to a scary movie and the sound of a gunshot sends them into a panic. So what the goal is not to spend very much time in that red zone, but also not spend too much time in the green zone. What you want to do is make certain that you're getting into that yellow zone, not very much into that red zone, but you expand that yellow zone out to sort of squeeze out the red. Don't squeeze out the green, but squeeze out that red.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. I think the dynamic sizing of these will change through life. And I think that's what childhood helps to determine is the thickness of each of these bands. Childhood stressors, adverse childhood events, being the victim of a crime, experiencing multiple stressors. PTSD is very much a complete shrinking of that yellow space, right? And the green space, and tending to spend way more time in the red because it's far easier that a small stressor can push us directly into a fawning or freeze state far more readily. So these are conditions where there's major changes that have occurred to the thickness of each of these bands. I agree with that completely.
But I think in most people's lives, especially in the Western world, in the United States, we're blessed with such abundance that what we're seeing is actually not so much that percentage of time being spent in the red zone being the problem, that we're actually seeing people spending too much time in the green zone, and they're losing that ability to move into uncomfortable situations and deal with them appropriately. And I point to a couple of different things. One is there's a book called The Anxious Generation, which is largely about the social media and the advent of iPhones and screens like iPads, et cetera, and what it's doing to children and their growth. And, I actually agree with a lot of what the author has to say, but he spends also some time talking sort of away from the technology side of things and talks about how, the kids born in the late 90s and into early 2000s, they have a very different childhood than they did in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where we joke about as Gen Xers, we're the last generation who were sort of ignored by their parents. They had to be told to look after their kids. It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your kids are? I mean, nowadays, parents don't let their kids out of their sight. They don't let them do things on their own. They're not out riding around the neighborhood on bicycles all day and into the night without having to check in, or if they're allowed to, without helmets on and buddies and all that kind of stuff. And maybe there's some truth to that. Maybe the world has become a more dangerous place. But I think for most people, it hasn't actually gotten more dangerous. We just became hyper aware of those things and are not letting our kids out to do those things and having the freedom to get some resilience, to build some resilience. And now when they get to be teenagers or into college, they don't have that store of experiences that make them feel like I can, because they haven't done it. And so I applaud those parents who say, you know what, I realize there's risks out there. I have to accept that. But if my kids don't experience some of those risks, then maybe they have to be controlled, maybe otherwise protected. Maybe it's a good idea to wear a helmet on a bicycle. I think that's a good idea. But maybe riding around the neighborhood without being seen by parents for a few hours is a good thing. And the second part is, bringing it back to the physiology. And I know that David Goggins talks a lot about this, and Joe Rogan talks about this, that there's scientific evidence now that shows that when you get up in the morning and do something, or during the early part of the day, you do something that you don't want to do, that you're actually putting yourself in an uncomfortable position. You're doing like a cold plunge, or going running, 10 miles, or go lifting weights when you're tired. Go do that thing you don't want to do. Even Mike Tyson, I think you've got it up on your board. He says, do the thing you hate to do like you love it. Okay,
Yeah,
go
discipline
find
is doing what you hate to do, but nonetheless doing it like you love it.
Exactly. And that is putting yourself into that yellow zone. Okay, maybe even pushing yourself towards that red zone, and do it. Because if you accept the fact that doing that is important, and it will literally change your brain. It literally, and the MRI, it shows the areas of your brain: creativity, resilience, stress management. All of those areas grow, become more robust, become more capable. And if you don't do them, you're more likely not to do the things that are necessary for even your own health and safety.
I love that you brought this up, and the specific area of the brain that has become kind of synonymous with the David Goggins area of the brain, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, brought to our attention by Dr. Huberman, who made it kind of awareness to the rest of the world, showed up there. But that area is underdeveloped in people that don't feel capable of doing things, or don't push themselves to do things they don't want to do. And that area is hyper developed in people that push themselves to do things they don't want to do. Right. So whether it's going for that run that you don't want to go for, jumping in the cold plunge that you don't want to jump into, or, something as simple as fasting. If you don't want to fast, but you push yourselves to do that fast, you're able to build up that specific area of brain, and through neuroplasticity, train yourself to handle these things and realize that it's not that bad, and realize that you can handle it, even though in your movie mind, you've created this model that says, I am incapable, or I don't think I'm capable of handling this. In reality, if you put yourself in that position, you actually are going to become much stronger by doing that. And I'll quickly just end what we're talking about today, talking about how we see the world. And the model that I found works really well for this is the NLP communications model. If you've ever seen it, you'll know what I'm talking about. But if you have not, this is the NLP communications model for those who can see it. This is a pretty extensive image, but I'm going to point to little areas and try to explain what we see here. And we'll try to go through this relatively quickly. So what occurs is we've got these meta programs and filters through which we see the world. These are our values, our beliefs, our language, our memories, our decisions, our time coding. And then what we've created within here are deletions, things we've forgotten about, distortions, things that happened in an objective way, and we've created a subjective generalization of what these things are and how they occur. So an external event will occur. This can be something like a daily stressor or some sort of external event that occurs. And that is going to be filtered through these meta programs, or these filters that we have here. These are past psychological stressors that have determined the filters through which we see the world, right? What are the scuffs on the lens through which we see the world? That information comes in, and then in our mind, we create a movie in what's called the movie mind. And this is essentially the story that we tell ourselves about what's happening, right? What is a story that we're telling ourselves about the occurrence, that external event? What that does is we create the story, and then through that story, we're asking a very important question of, am I safe or am I in danger? And that determination, whether we're safe or in danger, affects our physiology to tell us to go into ventral vagal, parasympathetic, or into sympathetic state accordingly. So our physiology will then change, and if we're in danger, we'll go into the sympathetic fight or flight style state. And that then is going to have a response to our behavior and lead to how our body responds to that external event, whether positively or negatively. Okay, so this is, for those who can't see it, I would highly recommend that you take a moment and watch this video on YouTube, because it explains how our psychology and our constant questioning through that neuroception eyesight or vision is asking, am I safe or am I in danger? And how that then affects the sympathetic and parasympathetic physiology, whether we go and push the accelerator or push the brakes.
Yeah. This is very reminiscent of the work that's being done right now by Anil Seth, where he's talking about the fact that things like your values, your beliefs, and previous decisions that you've made, and your memories are probably even more important than the actual present sensory information that's coming into your brain. You see something, and your brain has to interpret what it's seeing. And even before it's fully formed as an image, your brain is already referencing its own memories, its own beliefs, its own values about the circumstances that you're in to frame what that is that you're looking at. And so you can literally see something completely differently and experience it in a wholly different way than somebody else, simply because you have a completely different value set. For example, I like to run. So if you show me a picture of a desert highway with mountains in the far distance, the first thing I think of is, boy, that'd be cool to run there. Somebody who's experienced, near starvation or near, died of thirst might look at that and be fearful and say, I never want to be in that place ever again. I never want to go to that place. That's dangerous.
It's very interesting you say that, because I now, and I'm just thinking through what I do. So when I'm going to a speaking engagement, I'll always check out, if I don't already know the hotel that I'm staying at, I go and check it out online, and I don't look at the room. I don't care what the room looks like. I'm going to be sleeping there, and pretty much every hotel room looks the same. But I always check out the gym.
Mm-hmm.
I always check to see, do they have dumbbells? Do they have weight benches? Do they have running equipment? What is the gym situation in that hotel? And that determines what I'm going to pack. And I'm excited just the same way you love running. I love weight training. And so how we see it, what we value, what we want to then do, and how we perceive it. If I see a shitty gym at the hotel that I'm going to, I'm just like, yo, I want to go to a better hotel and change that exact thing, right? So, yeah. And so it's funny now, I've become very judgy about hotel gyms, but I imagine that's something. But you're exactly right. If I see a picture of a wicked hotel gym, I'm excited.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know that when I'm at the hotel, when I'm at the conference, I'm going to be able to go do a good workout, get my sweat on, feel really good and strong, and then be able to go and perform really well on stage or whatever it is that I'm ending up doing that day. So interesting that you said that, but I really appreciate that, because now in my own movie mind, I'm saying, oh yeah, wicked gym. I'm going to have a wicked workout and I'm going to go and do this and feel really confident, versus if it's not a great gym, then okay, what else can I do? Can I go for a walk in Central Park like I did when I was in New York? Or can I rent a bike and go somewhere else and go for a bike ride? So finding a way to make it work, that's the resilience piece, I think, is saying, okay, well, here's the cards I've been handed, but let me figure out how to make sure that I can enjoy the time that I have in this particular city because I'm lucky enough to be there.
I'm with you 100%. I do the same thing when I look at hotels, or I look at where I'm going. Is there going to be a place to work out? It's more important than anything other than possibly, is there a good steakhouse nearby?
Two very good questions every time we do that. I hope this episode has been a little bit of an eye-opener for anybody who's interested in what the polyvagal theory is, and understanding the psychological aspect and the effect that it then has on our physiology. Any final thoughts, JP?
No, I think this is a really fun episode. I wasn't expecting it to go this long. I've always been intrigued by polyvagal theory, and I'm glad that we had an opportunity to sort of make the parallel between what the psychology of polyvagal theory is and the physiology, and sort of talk through some of the details. It's great.
Absolutely. This was a great one. And if you enjoyed this, please share it with one person who you think could utilize this information to understand how psychology affects physiology and changes your autonomic state, whether you're in sympathetic, fight or flight, or able to enter that rest, digest, and recover state really effectively. So please go ahead and share this episode. We'd also very much appreciate it if you like and share and follow on whatever platform it is. Click that follow button on Spotify, click that subscribe button on Apple Podcasts. We would very much appreciate and love your support. And please share it with one person who you think could utilize this information. Until next time, we're wishing you upgraded health.